All right, class, welcome. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most fundamental tools in all of medicine. Seriously, you're going to be using this every single day of your professional lives, but you'd be surprised how few people really get the genius behind its design. So, let's look under the hood. You all know this letter. You've seen it a million times. It's kind of the North Star of every single eye exam. But as future optometrists, I want you to look at this and see more than just a letter. I want you to see it as a brilliant piece of scientific hardware. Its very shape, its proportions, they hold the story of the precision and, more importantly, the standardization that completely changed how we measure vision. So this brings us to the real question for today's session. What are we actually doing when we ask a patient to read this chart? I mean, it's way more than just, can you see the letter? We are actually quantifying the very limits of their visual perception. Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the basics, the stuff everyone thinks they know. Then we'll go back in time to meet the man himself, Dr. Snellen. After that, we'll decode the science baked into the letters. Then we'll finally unravel what 20/20 times actually means. And to wrap it up, we'll see how this whole thing has evolved for the modern clinic you'll be working in. All right, section 1. Let's start by making sure we're all on the same page and get the baseline knowledge locked in before we dig deeper. So, at its core, it seems incredibly simple, right? It's a tool that gives us a very precise measurement. It's just a series of letters that get progressively smaller and therefore harder to see. And the patient's performance? Well, that gives us a standardized, repeatable measurement of their visual acuity. It's simple, it's elegant, and it's just so effective. Okay, so now let's get into the history. Because really, understanding where our tools come from gives us a much deeper appreciation for the principles they're built on, and you start to see why they've stuck around for so long. Now just stop and think about that for a second. In just 1 year, Dr. Snellen went from messing around with abstract symbols to creating the fundamental design that we still rely on, over 160 years later. He wasn't the first person to make an eye chart, not by a long shot, but he was the first to standardize it. And that right there was the key. It made all the difference. So this is where things get really fascinating. We're going to talk about the specific geometry behind those letters. This is not just about picking a font that looks clear. This is where the true scientific rigor of the chart shines through, and it's something you absolutely have to understand to appreciate the test you're giving. First things first, let's get the language right. As clinicians, you need to know these are not just letters. The proper term is optotypes. And using that term shows that you get it, that you understand these are carefully constructed, scientific instruments, not just random characters from the alphabet. This right here, this is the secret sauce. This 5x5 grid is the absolute key to standardization. Every single optotype, whether it's an E or a P or a Z, follows these exact geometric rules. And what that does is it ensures that the visual challenge of identifying any letter on a given line is consistent and totally comparable to any other letter on that same line. And this really drives the point home. You can't just use any letter. I mean, ever wonder why there's no B or R? Well, it's because their shapes are more complex, which makes them easier to guess even when they're blurry. These specific 9 letters were chosen because they all have about the same level of legibility when they're built using Snellen's geometric rules. Okay, here we go. This is the part of the lesson everybody wants to know about. And trust me, your patients are going to ask you about this constantly. We're finally going to decode that famous fraction so you can explain it with total confidence and precision. Everybody uses this term, but let's get one thing straight right off the bat. Its definition has nothing to do with perfect vision. It's a very specific scientific measurement, and it's based entirely on distance and visual angles. You should really think of it as a reference point, a globally accepted baseline that Dr. Snellen himself created. Okay, let's just break this fraction down. The top number, the numerator, that's the easy part. It's just the testing distance, how far your patient is from the chart, and that's standardized at 20 feet. Now the bottom number, the denominator, that's the benchmark. That number tells you the distance at which a person with standard vision could read that exact same line of letters. But of course, that just leads to another question, right? What in the world is standard vision? Snellen couldn't just make it up. He had to define it with math. So he defined it as the ability to recognize an optotype when it takes up or subtends a visual angle of exactly 5 minutes of arc. It is a precise trigonometric definition. And think about this. To actually see that whole 5 arc-minute letter, your eye has to be able to pick out the critical details inside it, like the little white spaces between the arms of an E or the gap in a C. And those details, they subtend just 1 minute of arc. This tiny little angular measurement, it's the fundamental building block of the entire 20/20 system. And this is exactly how you'll explain it to your patients, in simple terms. If they have 20/40 vision, you tell them, look, to see that line of letters, you have to be standing here at 20 feet. A person with standard vision could back up all the way to 40 feet and still read that same line just as clearly. It's just a direct comparison of their performance against the standard. All right, for our last section, let's bring it all into the present day. Let's see how this incredible 19th century invention has adapted for the 21st century clinic you'll be practicing in. Because the core principles, they're timeless, but the technology, well, that has definitely evolved. So while the core principles are exactly the same, digital technology has solved some of the biggest weaknesses of the classic chart. Inconsistent room writing, that gets replaced by perfectly uniform standardized backlighting. And maybe most importantly, digital charts can randomize the letters. So that patient who comes in every year and has the fourth line memorized, yeah, that doesn't work anymore. But here it is, the final and maybe the most important takeaway that I want you to remember and communicate to your patients. 20/20 vision is not perfect vision. It's just not. As Dr. Churning pointed out over a century ago, it's really just a baseline for what we consider normal. A lot of healthy eyes can do much better. The 2 he's talking about here represents a visual acuity that's twice as good as the standard, what we would call 20/10 vision today. And that should leave you with a pretty fascinating thought. If 20/20 is just the standard reference point, what are the true limits of human sight? It's a great reminder that your job isn't just to get patients to some baseline number on a chart. Your job is to help them achieve the absolute best vision that they are capable of. And that, right there, is the art and the science of what you do. Okay, class dismissed.